Welcome to Nobody Told Me. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens.
And we are excited to talk with our guest on this episode, Dr. Rupy Aujla, who's an emergency medical doctor, general physician, and best-selling author.
And his latest book is called Eat to Beat Illness, 80 Simple, Delicious Recipes Inspired by the Science of Food as Medicine. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I can't wait to chat to you guys.
So explain a little bit about the idea behind the book of the Science of Food as Medicine.
Sure. So the book and the last book I wrote as well, The Doctor's Kitchen, is all about how simple changes to what we eat and how we live can amplify our defenses, our ever getting ill in the first place, and reducing the risk. Because preventing illness is much better than a cure in the first place. And I came across this myself through firsthand by overcoming my own medical condition. I had a cardiac problem called atrial fibrillation, which is where your heart beats exceptionally fast and irregularly. And when I looked at what I was eating and my lifestyle, I was able to overcome it over a year period. And that really opened up my eyes to the science of nutritional medicine and lifestyle as a force for improving the lives of so many different people. And since then, I've started introducing it into my clinical practice. And now I've done 2 cookbooks, and I'm super excited to have Eat to Beat Illness in the United States. It's been fascinating so far to see people's reactions to it.
Well, tell us more about what science is learning about using food as medicine, because it's fairly recent. I mean, in the last 30 or 40 years that we've really started to think about it this way.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually, because I think the whole science and art of food as medicine has really been steeped in our history for far longer than 30 or 40 years. It's something that's been instilled in Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, even the ancient practices of the Japanese culture that's very much alive today. And it's really blending that with the evidence-based approach that we have for modern science techniques that we apply to pharmaceutical medicine and surgical techniques. And that's what we're reigniting the passion for. And it's going back to basics. It's trying to put our bodies in the best environment as possible. And we do that with food and lifestyle means. And when you do that, your body have these innate mechanisms that look after itself. It sounds a little bit woo-woo and it sounds a little bit weird, but really we're designed to live in homeostasis. It's a fancy word for living in balance or equilibrium. And when you feed your body the right foods, when you put it in the best environments, there's good sleep patterns, there's exercising, we're designed to move. We're also designed to live in supportive communities and communicate with each other and communicate with nature as well. And when we do that, we bring a salutogenic approach to healthcare. And salutogenesis is really the process by which health is created. It's almost like rewilding as well. I love to use this sort of terminology in clinic as well because I think it sets the picture right. But it's really encouraging to see a lot of my colleagues now getting on board with this because whether it's through patient anecdotes or whether it's through their own health or their own family's health, we're all enduring the burden of lifestyle-related conditions, whether it be type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular problems, endocrine problems. Everyone is experiencing it now, and I think people are demanding more than simple pharmaceutical solutions, which are absolutely necessary in a lot of cases. I mean, I still work in emergency medicine, I still work in general practice, but certainly that has to be complemented with a whole plethora of lifestyle-related solutions.
So what's your big vision for food in mainstream medicine then?
Yeah, that's a really good point. My big vision is to, get people to appreciate just how impactful our plates can be on health, and also to simplify eating. I think there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding about what people should be eating and whether there should be a one diet for everyone. We've become very evangelistic about diet. It's a very emotive subject, whether you're talking to someone who is paleo or vegan or Mediterranean or carnivore. There's so many different ways of eating these days. But really, it comes down to the individual. And I think there's a lot of similarity between a whole bunch of different diets that seem on paper quite different. And when you look at the similarities, you notice it's probably about 80% concordance with a lot of them. And I whittled those down in my book, Eat to Beat Illness, into principles of healthy eating. And those are eating largely plants, so getting as many different plants on your plate as possible, eating lots of different colors, because colors of food represent micronutrients and phytonutrients as well. Those are the nutrients that you find from tomatoes and aubergine and different colored vegetables. And phytonutrients, of which there are about 8,000, confer huge benefits to human health through anti-inflammation signaling, to benefits to your gut. And a nice segue into the third principle is fiber. We clearly do not have enough fiber, and different types of fiber, again, of which there are hundreds of different types, feed and nurture your microbiota, this population of bugs that live largely in your large intestine, and they're absolutely inseparable from health. And you combine that with good sources of good quality fats and eating in time, you really have a blueprint for a healthy way of eating that's very, very accessible for the entire population. And that's kind of what the message is from the book, and everything I try and do in culinary medicine in the UK and the non-profit work that I do too.
In what ways does food impact our emotions, and what kinds of foods impact our emotions the most?
Sure. So, I mean, there's two different ways in which we can go down the route of answering that question. So, on one hand, we could talk about psychological issues, mental health issues from a pathological perspective. So depression, anxiety, low mood, these are features of medicine which now represent the number one cause of the global burden of disease. And food recently has been accepted as a way in which we can treat alongside traditional therapies. We can treat people with these sorts of issues. There's a new term called nutritional psychiatry that was coined by a colleague of mine, Professor Felice Jacko, who's based in Australia. And for the last 4 years, they've been doing some interventions using food with counseling and other psychotherapies to try and treat these issues. And so there's clearly a way in which fiber, whole grains, lots of different colors, largely plant-based ingredients, largely plant-based diets rather, can impact our mood on a whole bunch of different levels. And then there's the other sort of community aspect of food as well. When you sit down and you eat with your family members or your friends and you engage in conversation, there is something very, very special and almost intangible about that experience that certainly has an impact on our emotions as well. And so, my motto in the kitchen is flavor as well as function. It's got to be about marrying both the health benefits as well as the beauty of eating and the medicinal effects of eating well. You can't have one without the other. You can't make it so sterile and clean that it forgoes the traditional values that we put onto food as well. And I believe that has like a huge emotive effect.
I love how you talk about using a lot of different spices in your cooking and how beneficial that can be to our health to cook with something like garlic or turmeric. And I don't think I get enough of those in my diet. And I take them in supplement forms. And I take a pill of turmeric or garlic each day. Is it just as effective to take it that way, or is it almost better to just have it on our food?
Yeah, I think there are benefits of both. So let's say you have an unvaried diet and you don't really know how to use it, and actually you prefer taking a whole capsule. Mm-hmm. Then, for certain people that can be fine, particularly if they don't enjoy those particular ingredients. The one thing I would say about supplements is that when you're supplementing with individual components of an ingredient like turmeric, for example, you probably come across things like curcumin, which is just one type of phytochemical that you find in turmeric. Mm-hmm. Well, then you're not really benefiting from the huge number of different chemicals that you find in whole turmeric itself. So if I was to make a suggestion, I would say, using turmeric capsules with whole turmeric powder rather than individual components of turmeric itself. And the same goes for things like resveratrol that you find in dried peanuts and grape skins and wines and stuff like that, and different components of green tea, for example. But really, trying to figure out what your palate responds to is a great way of determining how you can get more different spices and herbs into your cooking. So it doesn't always need to be about the exotic spices like turmeric or cumin or sumac. If you enjoy basil, rosemary, oregano, these benefits of these culinary herbs are just as impressive as some of the more expensive ones on the shelf. And really adding different layers of variety is very personal, and that's why I'm privileged to work in a clinical environment in London where we have a multitude of different ethnicities and different cultures, and they blend together. And that's why when I give dietary advice, I have to be very responsive to how people eat. And that's why the book jumps through different cuisines. We have Chinese recipes and Indian food, obviously, and European, modern British, American style, Italian, because these are the sorts of conversations that I'm having with people, and I'm trying to marry what they tend to like with ways in which they can add variety, diversity, more fiber, more color, and lots more plants as well.
What can you tell us about the connection between nutrition and dementia?
So nutrition and dementia is fascinating. I mean, dementia as a subject matter is quite grim. It's now the leading cause of death in the UK, and we're witnessing an unprecedented era where our brains are under attack, and that can come from a whole bunch of different issues to do with our food system at this point in time. I'll go through a couple because it is quite a nuanced subject. But metabolic control, so the issues around excess sugar in our diets, which leads to issues with glucose regulation, a propensity toward type 2 diabetes, which is where you lose your ability to control your sugar levels in your blood, is certainly having an impact on the likelihood of Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative disease in general. So that's one way in which nutrition can adversely affect that. Inflammation as a concept is quite misunderstood. It's essentially a short-term adaptive response to external stimuli. So that's short-term adaptive response. And inflammation is perhaps one of the most important processes that we have in our body to defend ourselves against pathogens, bacteria, viruses. But it's the excess of inflammation, too much inflammation at a very low grade level that just sort of hangs around, doesn't really go away, that can actually have a detrimental impact on a number of systems, including our brains as well. And so when we try and address those issues that can exceed inflammation, excess sugar, poor fiber, not enough variety in the diet, not enough micronutrients from our food, then we go a long way at mitigating the issues with excess inflammation and put everything in balance again as well. And then obviously there's a whole bunch of other issues surrounding dementia that go beyond nutrition. So our sense of purpose, our community, how stimulated we are, the kinds of things that influence our sleep hygiene as well. These are all having potentially causative effects on the likelihood of dementia. And you combine that with nutrition, poor nutrition, then it's no wonder we're seeing record rates of it. So nutrition is certainly one way in which we can greatly reduce the risk of dementia. And when you combine that with lifestyle measures, as I do in the book, every chapter, I do a deep dive into the brain or skin or inflammation, and I combine the sections with the lifestyle elements too as well that we can use to protect ourselves. Then you really have a medicinal package there.
What do you think is the biggest, most immediate change that we need to make if we've been eating terribly our entire lives, and say we have a family member or a friend who's been diagnosed with an illness that could be somewhat related to food and we're getting nervous? What do we need to change?
I think it's a really good question, and it's a tough one to answer in a singular way. So what I would say is try to figure out what the best next step is for that person. Do they want to improve their breakfast, or do they want to add more variety to their meals? At a population level, what I would say, certainly from a UK and a US point of view, is we do not get enough fiber in our diet. And you'll hear me talk about fiber so much. And the reason why is because, A, there are tons of different types of fibers, and you can't supplement your way into increasing your fiber. It's not about taking inulin. It's not about taking prebiotic fibers. It's about getting more variety and more different types of whole grains and legumes and chickpeas and pulses into your diet, because that's where that's the type of food that's going to feed these incredible microbes that live all around our body, but largely in our gut. And what these microbes do is that they digest food, they produce micronutrients, they produce vitamins for us, they reduce inflammation, they improve our immune system, they regulate blood sugar, they interact with our brains as well, they create neurotransmitters. Honestly, the CV, the list of things that these microbes do for us is just absolutely phenomenal. So I think in a lot of cases, fiber is lacking, and it's probably the first thing I try and hone down on whenever I talk to patients about it.
What about the impact of our diet on immunity?
Yeah, so I mean, immunity is another fascinating topic. I think it's misunderstood to be just our defense force, but really what our immune cells do, of which there are many different types of specialized types, is they really keep everything in order. They're almost like a peacekeeper. They recognize friend from foe. They ensure correct signaling between cells. They remove cells that are malfunctioning. They recognize friend from foe, but also accept foe at the same time. And the ways in which we can improve our immunity are multifold, but from a dietary perspective, honestly, it comes back down to gut health and nurturing that microbiota, because 70% of the immune cells that we have and that we rely on to improve our immune system are located in the gut lining, as something called gut-associated lymphoid tissue. And by improving our microbial health that we do with variety, herbs and spices, lots of different types of fiber, we actually bolster that activity as well, and we improve its activity. So yeah, I would say immune health is very much related to our guts.
And how much are foods related to our sleep patterns?
Yeah, so it's a fascinating topic, sleep in itself. Excess sugars and eating too late at night can certainly disrupt your circadian rhythm. And the hormones that essentially regulate your sleep patterns. So one thing I would say about nutrition and sleep is that not eating too late can be probably one of the most effective ways of ensuring that you're getting a good quality sleep. Mm-hmm. And then also the most obvious things come earlier in the day, so caffeine intake, high sugar intake, when you're choosing to eat your meals as well, and when you're choosing to have the nutrient-dense meals as well. Sorry, not the nutrient-dense meals, the calorie-dense meals as well. We tend to have those quite late at night, but that can actually lead your body to be reliant on mechanisms to digest those foods when you should actually be giving your gut a rest and actually focusing on sleep mechanisms. So yeah, no, I think it's definitely related, and there's probably some other mechanisms that I think are probably a little bit more important when it comes to improving the quality of your sleep.
Doctor, we mentioned the title of your book is Eat to Beat Illness, 80 Simple, Delicious Recipes Inspired by the Science of Food as Medicine. Your recipes look delicious. Some of them have quite a few ingredients, and I'm wondering what are some simple, healthy foods to have on the go if you're not a very good chef at home.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm glad you liked the recipe look at. I was there during the photo shoot, and it was just such a fun time and to create those recipes and shoot them. I would say some of the most nutrient-dense, the most nutrient-dense ingredients are often the cheapest on the shelf. So things like red cabbage and cavolo nero, savoy, pointed cabbages, dark green leafy vegetables. On the go, I would say nuts and seeds are absolutely power-packed full of nutrition. They've got good quality fats, good quality fiber. It's almost like nature's perfect food. And so when you're on the go, or even if you're trying to improve the nutrient density of your food, scattering some seeds on top of your meal before you eat it adds texture, adds crunch, and it's a great way of increasing your good quality fat intake as well, which has benefits on your gut and your inflammation levels through the omega-3 content of certain nuts as well, particularly walnuts and chia as well. So yeah, I think that's probably the most nutrient dense for on the go, and things like berries, particularly when they're in season, and top tip, the smaller berries as well, more concentrated per weight of some of the flavonoids that you find in blackberries and blueberries. So yeah, absolutely. I think those are the two. I always have those when I'm at work. It's essentially my snack on the go.
You've mentioned sugars a few times, and I really wanted to talk about that because I have friends who will tell me that eating fruit as I do, I mean, you just mentioned berries, and I love berries, but even that has too much sugar, and I need to be avoiding eating too many berries. What do you think?
So I think sugar has got the same reputation as fat did about 20 years ago, and there's a huge demonizing culture around sugar in totality, whereas we need to get back to basics here. Sugar is probably the most important molecule to every cell in your body. We rely on sugar as a fuel source. Everything you consume, the large proportion of what you consume in your diet, is broken down into simple sugars for consumption and digestion and metabolism. So what we're really dealing with in today's Western environment is excess refined sugar in the diet, one where all the fiber and all the micronutrients have been stripped out. Fruit, on the other hand, in its whole form, let's talk about an apple, for example, has got hundreds of different types of phytochemicals, all the different plant chemicals that have anti-inflammatory effects and anti-glycemic effects that actually regulate the sugar as well. It has different types of fiber, and when you consume these different types of fiber, they form a gel on the inside of your digestive tract. So it actually blunts the sugar effect in your blood as well. So when you have an apple juice versus a whole apple, the effect on your sugar level in your blood is completely different. Now, from person to person, depending on what your metabolism is like, whether you have something like prediabetes, whether you've been eating a certain way for a long period of time and now you have an issue with sugar, it could either be a good thing or a bad thing to have even something like fruit. But for the vast majority of people, fruit is absolutely fine. In fact, it's very health promoting. Berries, pears, particularly fruit with the skins on as well, so you actually have that added fiber, are really good ingredients. And I think we need to get out of the habit of demonizing fruit as much as we demonize something like white sugar in excess.
Or if you have the fruit in a can and then there's all that added sugar, I think that is something that's totally different than having, pears in a can versus fresh pears.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the canned products will have added syrups to them as well. And I think we need to get a lot more confident at reading labels and seeing, what's in addition. There shouldn't be anything added to fruit to make it sweeter. It's already sweet enough. And I think that begs a wider question, really, about how we have trained our palates to be less refined when it comes to appreciating the bitter notes of food. I personally love eating chocolate, but I eat 75 or 80% cacao chocolate, and
oh, wow.
For a lot of people, that's too bitter. Right?
I was going to say that's not what I have.
So I don't know what it is about it, but perhaps it's because I've trained my palate to appreciate those beautiful bitter notes and the complexity of that ingredient. That it tastes so much better than the milk chocolate variety that often has a lot more sugar added to it. It's far, far too sweet. And I think we need to retrain our taste buds to appreciate that. But obviously it's not something you can do overnight. And most people wouldn't be able to deal with 8% cacao.
You talked about sugar, and another controversial thing is salt. What message would you like to get out about salt?
I think salt is an interesting subject. I think it's pretty much unequivocal evidence to suggest that too much salt, mainly coming from processed and convenience foods, is related to cardiovascular problems. However, the majority of where people get their salt from are from processed and convenience items. So that begs the question, is it the combination of that high sugar, high salt, refined product issue, or is it the salt on its own? And I think when you use salt appropriately, when you use good quality crystals and you season little and often throughout the cooking process and perhaps a little bit at the end, you A, don't need that much salt to make a good seasoned plate, and B, that in a sense is using it in appropriate amounts. And don't make any mistake, we need salt. It's a very important component of our food. What we developed essentially from aquatic species, and so we do definitely need that salt balance. But again, it's like the excess of it, and having it particularly in the form that is combined with convenience foods and high sugar. It's just a catalogue for disaster. So those are my thoughts on salt. I don't think we should radically strip it out for everything, and I certainly don't believe in salt replacements. But certainly little and often through the cooking process. And when you're eating whole foods, largely plants, you don't really need that much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How realistic do you think it is for people to think, if they have been diagnosed with something like cancer, for example, that they can try and reduce that inflammation with diet?
I think cancer is one of the most difficult topics to discuss because it's such a huge umbrella term from so many different types of cancers. And the last thing that I would want people to get out of the chapter that I wrote is that you can reverse cancer with nutrition alone. And I think that's perhaps one of the most dangerous messages that unfortunately is circulated on the internet. And that's another reason why I chose to write a chapter all based on how to reduce our risk and prevent the occurrence of cancer in the first place. Because if you don't discuss that topic and you make it taboo, it allows a vacuum for a lot of unqualified people to weigh in and mislead a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So the issue surrounding cancer for me is that we don't talk enough about prevention. There is clear evidence that if you eat largely plants, lots of good quality foods and quality fats and fiber, you massively reduce the risk of cancer. However, that's reducing the risk. There is nothing to say that you can use food to help in the recovery process or reduce. Even someone can lead the healthiest diet and lead the healthiest lifestyle, but through the sheer tragedy of human biology, we can succumb to cancer. And it's just one of those unfortunate tragedies that is out of a lot of people's control. With that in mind, I still think we should be having conversations around how we can reduce the risk, because it is one of the number one killers, and it's just happening more and more often. And I see that in A&E and my clinical practice, and there is certainly a lot we can do with food. There's some really, really interesting stuff coming out about, I don't know if you've come across it, but it's a field of metabolic oncology. So it's where we use chemotherapy, we use radiotherapy, we use surgical interventions, but we also have a nutritional element that optimizes the microenvironment where tumor and healthy cells live, so we can actually reduce the aggressiveness of tumors. It's very, very new, and again, it comes down to the type of cancer that we're talking about, which are very, very different, whether we're talking about brain, whether we're talking about the different cell lines, whether we're talking about lung, breast, etc. So yeah, it's a fascinating, complex topic, but I'm really hopeful for a lot more emphasis on nutritional medicine in the field of oncology in the future.
Doctor, our show is called Nobody Told Me, and we always ask our guests, what is your nobody told me lesson? So what is it that nobody told you about eating to beat illness that you learned on your own that you kind of wished you'd maybe learned earlier?
Yeah, I mean, the nobody told me thing is very relevant to me, because 10 years ago when I got ill, nobody told me anything about nutrition. I went to one of the best medical schools in the world, Imperial College. I had incredible colleagues. I had to learn essentially myself the basics of clinical nutrition and how to apply that to my own personal life. And I'm grateful that nobody told me, actually, because it made me a lot more resilient, and it made me a lot more, interested in the subject to the point now where I can write books and I can research, and I'm doing my master's, and I just want to spread the message of this as far as it can go. So that my nobody told me moment was definitely what spurred this whole movement for the Doctor's Kitchen in the first place.
And how can people contact you and learn more about the book, which, as we mentioned, is fabulous and really colorful and fun to look at?
Oh, thanks. So you can catch me at thedoctorskitchen.com. We do weekly recipes that are science-based every week on the newsletter, and then Instagram, Twitter, and the socials is doctors_kitchen. And the book, I believe, is going to be in all good bookstores and on Amazon, IndieBound, and Barnes & Noble. So, yeah, go grab a copy.
Oh, sounds like good advice. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Our thanks to our guest, Dr. Rupy Aujla, the author of Eat to Beat Illness, 80 Simple, Delicious Recipes Inspired by the Science of Food as Medicine. And again, his website is thedoctorskitchen.com. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens.
You're listening to Nobody Told Me. Thank you so much for joining us.